Sarah Whitmore planted both feet on the platform at Harlan Creek, Kansas, and looked every one of those staring townspeople dead in the eye. 12 trunks behind her, 5 children clinging to her skirts, and not a single soul waiting to meet her the way she had been promised. She did not flinch. She did not apologize. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and said in a voice that carried clear to the far end of that platform, "I am here for the Turner children, every last one of them." If you are watching this story for the first time, I want you to subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very end, because what happens to Sarah and those children will stay with you long after the final word. Drop a comment and tell me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let us go back to that platform in Harlan Creek, Kansas in the summer of 1883, and meet a woman the whole town underestimated from the very first second she stepped off that train. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday, which was the cruelest day of the week for bad news, and Sarah Whitmore had always believed that. She had been elbow-deep in bread dough when her neighbor Mrs. Pratt knocked on the door of her small Cincinnati house with an envelope in one hand and an expression on her face that no woman ever wants to see on the face of a neighbor. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron. She took the letter. She read it standing right there in the doorway, and she did not cry, not yet, because Clara's handwriting was still on the envelope, and for one more second she could pretend her younger sister was still alive somewhere in Kansas, writing letters and raising children and doing the thing she had always done, which was surviving everything the world threw at her with a kind of stubborn grace that made lesser people feel ashamed of their own complaints. Clara Turner had died of fever on a Friday evening in late May. She had left behind 7 children, a grieving husband named Jacob, and a letter she must have written, knowing she was not going to recover, because it was addressed not to Jacob, but to Sarah, and it said in Clara's plain, steady hand, "You are the only one I trust with them. Come if you can. Come even if you think you cannot. You always were the stronger one, even when you did not know it." Sarah had read that sentence 4 times. Then she had gone inside, sat down at her kitchen table, and cried for 1 hour exactly. When the hour was done, she stood up, washed her face, and began making a list. She had 5 children of her own to consider, not born to her, but left to her 3 years prior, when her brother Thomas and his wife had died of cholera within a week of each other in Pittsburgh. Henry was 14 now, and thought he was a man. Dorothea was 11 and sharp as a tack. The twins Eli and May were 8 and inseparable, and occasionally maddening. And little Rose was 4 years old and had not spoken a single unnecessary word in her entire life, which Sarah privately considered a form of wisdom. These 5 children were her responsibility, her family, her whole household. They were also, she had decided before the sun went down on the day Clara's letter arrived coming with her to Kansas. She had not asked anyone's permission. There was no one to ask. She had sold what she could, packed what mattered, bought 6 train tickets, and written a single letter back to Harlan Creek, addressed to Jacob Turner, informing him that she was coming, and that she was bringing her children, and that she expected to be useful, and expected to stay as long as she was needed. She had not waited for his reply. She did not have time to wait for his reply. Clara had asked her to come, and so she was coming, and that was the end of the matter. What she had not fully anticipated was the town. Harlan Creek was not a large place. It sat in the flat, dry heart of Kansas, like something that had been dropped there by accident, and had not yet worked up the energy to move. There was a main street with a general store, a bank, a church, a livery, a small hotel, and a collection of wooden storefronts that had seen better decades. There was a station platform made of weathered pine, and on that platform, on the afternoon Sarah arrived, there were approximately 30 people who appeared to have gathered for the sole purpose of forming an opinion about her. She heard them before the train fully stopped. Not words exactly, just the particular quality of silence that crowds make when they are about to say something unkind and have not quite decided on the exact shape of it yet. Sarah had grown up with that silence. She was a tall woman, broad-shouldered, full-figured, with dark hair pinned under a sensible traveling hat, and dark eyes that had never once in her 41 years looked away from something she needed to look at. She was not a woman who pretended not to see what was directly in front of her. She stepped off that train and the silence broke into whispers. "Lord have mercy." He said she was a widow, not a... And are those children with her? How many? Count them. 1, 2, there are 5 of them. Henry came down the steps behind her, carrying the smallest trunk, with the expression of a boy who has already decided that he will not be embarrassed on behalf of anyone today. Dorothea followed, one hand on May's shoulder. May's hand locked around Eli's wrist. Rose came last, small and solemn, holding the battered cloth rabbit she had carried since Pittsburgh, looking at the crowd with the calm, assessing gaze of someone considerably older than 4. Sarah had counted 12 trunks. She had also counted the children. She did both again now out of habit, then turned to face the crowd. A man near the front, heavy-set, well-dressed for a Kansas afternoon, with the kind of jaw that suggested he was accustomed to people agreeing with him, looked at her and then looked past her as though expecting someone else to step off the train behind her. When no one did, he looked back, and something in his expression shifted from expectation to barely concealed contempt. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, as though the question itself was already an accusation. "That's right," Sarah said. "I'm Alderman Crouch. I sit on the town council." He paused in a way that indicated he felt this information was meaningful. "We received your letter. Mr. Turner received your letter." "I'm glad to hear it. You brought children." He said it the way a person says you brought a disease. "I did," Sarah said. "They belong to me. And you understand the situation here. 7 children, a working ranch, a man in grief. We had expected..." He stopped and seemed to be choosing his next words with considerable care. "We had expected someone more..." Another pause. "Suitable." The crowd was very quiet now. Sarah was aware of Henry behind her going very still in the way he went still when he was deciding whether to say something that would make things worse. She was aware of Rose pressing against the back of her skirt. She was aware of every eye on the platform measuring her and finding her wanting in whatever calculation they were running, and she had been measured by meaner crowds than this one in harder circumstances than a Kansas train platform in the middle of summer. She took one step forward. "Mr. Crouch," she said, "my sister Clara Turner wrote me a letter from her deathbed asking me to come and care for her children. I buried my grief. I packed my family. I rode 3 days on a train to keep a promise I made to a woman who trusted me with everything she loved in this world. I did not come here to be suitable for the town of Harlan Creek. I came here to be useful to 7 children who have lost their mother." She let that settle for exactly 1 second. "Now, is someone going to help me with these trunks, or am I to manage that on my own as well?" The silence that followed was a different quality than the first one. It was the silence of people revising their assessment. A boy broke it. He came around the side of the small station building at a near run, skidding to a stop in the dust at the edge of the platform, and he was maybe 12 years old, dark-haired with his mother's eyes, Clara's eyes, and the look on his face when he saw Sarah was so raw and so complicated that it nearly broke her open right there in front of everyone. He wanted to run to her, and he did not want anyone to see him want that. He stood at the edge of the platform, and his jaw worked, and he said in a voice he was clearly trying to make older than it was, "You look like her. You look like Mama." Sarah stepped off the platform and walked to him and put her hand on his shoulder and said quietly for him alone, "You must be Thomas." He nodded once, fast chin down. "I have some children over there," she said, "who have been on a train for 3 days and could use a friendly face. Do you think you could introduce yourself?" He looked past her at Henry and Dorothea and the twins and small silent Rose with her rabbit, and something in the rigid set of his 12-year-old shoulders eased just slightly. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She had learned his name from Clara's letters. Clara had written her long letters about all 7 of them. Thomas was the oldest, serious and responsible. Then came Anna, who was 10 and motherless and furious about it. Marcus 8, who had broken his arm twice and would likely break it again. Grace, 6 and twins. Lily and Lottie, who were 5 and spent their days in elaborate parallel play that no adult had ever successfully decoded. And the youngest baby Samuel, not yet 2, who had apparently spent the weeks since Clara's death being carried from arm to arm by everyone in the household in rotating shifts because he would not sleep unless someone was holding him. Sarah had thought about all 7 of them for every mile of those 3 days on the train. She had not thought very specifically about Jacob Turner. She thought about him now because he was walking toward her from the far end of the platform, and he was not what she had constructed in her imagination. He was taller than she had pictured, leaner, with the kind of frame that comes from years of physical work and not enough time at a table. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, and a face that had been handsome once and was something more interesting than handsome, now lined with grief and weather, and the particular exhaustion of a man who had been holding a household together through sheer force of will and was running low on will. He walked with a slight hesitation at the knee. Old injury, she guessed, and he had taken off his hat and was holding it in both hands, the way men hold hats when they are trying to be respectful and do not know what else to do with themselves. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her. He looked at the 5 children behind her. He looked at Thomas, who had moved instinctively toward the group of strangers and was already exchanging cautious words with Henry. He looked back at Sarah. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Turner. I got your letter." "I know. Your alderman mentioned it." Something moved in his expression at that, not quite amusement but close to its neighbor. "Crouch give you trouble." "He expressed concerns," Sarah said. "I addressed them." Jacob looked at her for another long moment, and she looked back, and neither of them looked away. And it was not a comfortable moment exactly, but it was an honest one. He was trying to figure out who she was. She was letting him. "I have to be straight with you," he said finally, low enough that the crowd would not hear. "I wrote to Clara's church asking for help. I did not write to you specifically. When your letter came, I didn't know what to think. And now you're here, and you've got—" He glanced at the 5 children again. "You've got 5. "I do. That would make 12 children total." "It would. Under one roof." "Mr. Turner," Sarah said, "I have managed 5 children in a 2-room Cincinnati house through a Cincinnati winter on a widow's savings. I am not frightened of 12. He looked at her for a long time. Then he put his hat back on his head, took a breath that seemed to settle something in him, and turned toward the stack of trunks at the edge of the platform. "Thomas," he called, "come help with these. Henry, is it?" He glanced at Sarah for confirmation. She nodded. Henry grabbed that end. The boys moved. The trunks moved. The crowd on the platform began to disperse by degrees, some satisfied, some disappointed, some still whispering in a way that Sarah noted and filed away without visible reaction. Alderman Crouch caught her eye as she passed. "We'll be watching Mrs. Whitmore," he said. It was intended as a warning. "I would expect nothing less," Sarah said pleasantly, and moved on. The ranch was 4 miles outside of town. Jacob drove the wagon. Sarah sat beside him with Rose on her lap. The other children had sorted themselves into the wagon bed in a configuration that had required approximately 45 seconds of negotiation and had produced a settlement that seemed for now acceptable to all parties. Thomas sat closest to the front within earshot of Jacob. Henry had positioned himself at the back, which was his way of being useful and private at the same time. Dorothea had somehow already learned Lily and Lottie's names and was engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. Eli and Marcus were sizing each other up with the focused attention of boys who have already decided they are going to be either allies or rivals and have not yet determined which. May had found baby Samuel. Someone had put the baby in the wagon. Sarah did not know who, one of the older girls she suspected, and May had found him tucked in a basket and had promptly picked him up and was holding him with the competent ease of a child who had spent years around a 4-year-old and knew exactly how to hold a small person. Samuel looked up at May with the particular calm of a baby who has been held by so many different people in recent weeks that a new person no longer registers as alarming. Jacob noticed. He said nothing, but his jaw shifted slightly. Sarah said, "She's good with little ones." "I can see that." A pause. "She yours." "Thomas's sister, my brother's girl. I've had her since she was 5. He nodded. They drove in silence for a mile. The flat Kansas landscape opened up around them, grass and sky, and the particular quality of summer light out here that was nothing like Cincinnati. Light thicker somehow, more present. The kind of light that makes everything look either very beautiful or very harsh, depending on the hour. "The ranch is not in good shape," Jacob said. He said it the way a man says something he has been rehearsing for a while. "I want you to know that, before you see it. Since May, I've been doing what I can, but there's only so much one man can do when he's also got 7 children to—" He stopped. Started again. "The kitchen garden's mostly gone. The house needs attention. The older girls have been trying to keep up with the cooking and cleaning, but they shouldn't have to be doing it. They're children, and I know it, and I—" He stopped again. Sarah said, "Mr. Turner." He looked at her. "You kept 7 children alive and a ranch running for 6 weeks in grief," she said. "That is not a small thing. Do not apologize for it." He looked back at the road. His hands on the reins tightened slightly, and then released. "Clara talked about you," he said. "In her letters home over the years, she said you were the steady one." "She was always more generous than accurate," Sarah said. "She wasn't wrong about much," he said very quietly. And that was all he said about Clara for the rest of the drive, and Sarah understood that this was all he could say about Clara for now, and did not push for more. The ranch appeared at the end of a long flat track, and Sarah looked at it with the clear eyes of a woman taking accurate inventory. The house was large, which was good. The fencing needed repair. The kitchen garden was indeed a ruin of unpulled weeds and missed harvests. The barn was sound. The yard was a sprawl of abandoned children's implements. A hoop, a wooden horse, a small wagon with one wheel removed for reasons that had not yet been explained. The house itself was clean, in the way that a house is clean when someone has made a desperate effort at cleanliness without quite enough time or help to achieve it properly. Jacob pulled the wagon to a stop. 6 children piled out of the back. Anna was on the porch, 10 years old, arms crossed Clara's jaw. Clara's dark eyes and an expression of pure defensive suspicion aimed directly at Sarah. Sarah climbed down from the wagon without help, Rose still on her hip, and walked up to the porch and stopped in front of Anna and looked at her straight on without flinching at the hostility. "You must be Anna," she said. "I know who I am," Anna said. "I know you do. I'm Sarah. Your mother was my sister." "I know who you are too." Anna's voice was tight and controlled and full of grief she had probably decided was not allowed to show. "Why did you bring all those children?" "Because they're mine, and I don't leave mine behind." Anna looked at the group assembled in the yard, the Whitmore children standing slightly apart from the Turner children, all of them watching the older ones with curiosity, and the younger ones with that open, frank appraisal that children use when they are deciding about someone new. "We don't need help," Anna said. "You don't need help," Sarah said. "Your brothers and sisters do, and your father does. And I am here because my sister asked me to come, and I keep my promises. I am not here to take your mother's place. Nobody could do that. I am here to help you all keep going." She held Anna's gaze. "Can you let me try?" Anna said nothing, but she uncrossed her arms. She moved one step to the side. It was not a welcome exactly, but it was a door. Sarah walked through it. Inside the house smelled of wood smoke and unwashed dishes, and the particular scent of a home that has been holding grief for 6 weeks. Sarah stood in the middle of the main room, Rose still on her hip, and took it in. The fireplace needed cleaning. The dishes in the basin needed attention. There were children's clothes draped over chairbacks and boots left in walkways, and the general evidence of people living in a space that had lost its organizing intelligence. "Gather round," she said. Not loudly, but with the particular quality of voice that made children come. They came, all of them, Turner children and Whitmore children alike, 12 in total, ranging from 14-year-old Henry, with his self-conscious dignity, to 2-year-old Samuel, still in May's arms. And they stood in a loose, irregular circle in the main room and looked at her. "My name is Sarah," she said. "Your names I already know, so you don't need to introduce yourselves. We are going to figure out how to live together in this house, and we are going to figure it out together, and the first thing we are going to do is get this kitchen cleaned and something on the stove for supper. Thomas, you know where the wood is kept. Henry, go with him. Anna, I need someone who knows this kitchen. Is that you? Anna hesitated, then stiffly, yes. Good. Come show me where everything is. Jacob stood in the doorway watching all of this. Sarah did not look at him. She was already moving toward the kitchen, Anna a half step behind her. 12 children redistributing themselves through the house like water finding its level. He stood there for a long moment in the doorway of his own house, and something shifted in his face that was not yet hope exactly, but was something adjacent to it. The way the sky looks in the hour before the rain arrives. When you are not sure yet whether it will be enough, but you are no longer entirely sure it will not be. That first evening supper was cornbread and salt pork, and the last of a pot of beans someone had left on the back of the stove, and it was not elegant, and it was not enough, but it was hot, and it was ready, and all 12 children ate it, sitting at a table that was not large enough for 12 children, and had not been designed with that intention, and required 3 children to sit on upturned crates at the end. Nobody complained. Henry passed the cornbread without being asked. Thomas showed Eli where the water bucket was kept. May kept Samuel in her lap and fed him from a spoon with the focused patience of someone twice her age. Jacob sat at the head of the table and looked down the length of it at this improbable household, and then looked at Sarah at the far end serving bread from a basket, answering a question from Grace on one side, and preventing an argument between Marcus and Eli on the other. And she looked up, and caught him looking, and held his gaze for just a second before looking back at Grace. Later, when the children were in bed, an undertaking that had required 40 minutes and 4 different negotiations, and 1 small crisis involving Lily's blanket, and 1 involving Rose's rabbit. Sarah sat at the kitchen table alone with a cup of cold coffee, and the list she had begun in her head on the train and was now committing to paper. Kitchen garden, fencing, chore assignments by age, schooling schedule, winter provisions. She wrote in small, clear handwriting, filling the page with the orderly architecture of a plan. Jacob came in from checking the animals and stopped when he saw the light still burning. "You should sleep," he said. "It's late." "I will," she said. "I'm nearly done." He looked at the list. She did not cover it or apologize for it. He read it for a moment, then pulled out the opposite chair and sat down. "The garden," he said, pointing at the first item. "Soil's still good. Lost the summer crop, but there's time for a fall planting if we move fast." "That's what I thought," she said. "The fencing on the east pasture, that's the priority, before anything else." "Write it down," she said, and pushed the paper toward him and offered him the pencil. He looked at the pencil in her extended hand. He took it. He wrote east fencing at the top of the list and underlined it once. Then he put the pencil down and looked at what she had written, and what he had written, and the list that was theirs now, both of them, and said nothing. The lamp burned low between them. Somewhere in the house, a child coughed and then settled. The Kansas night pressed against the windows full of crickets, and the distant sound of cattle, and the kind of silence that is not empty at all, but full of everything that is just beginning. The list was still on the table when Sarah woke before dawn. She knew it before she opened her eyes, because she had not slept deeply enough to forget anything. She lay still for 30 seconds in the small room Jacob had cleared for her, a spare room off the kitchen that had been used for storage and still smelled faintly of dried herbs and old wood, and she listened to the house. A house tells you things when it is quiet. This one told her it was holding its breath. She was dressed and had the stove going before the first gray light touched the windows. Thomas found her first. He appeared in the kitchen doorway at 5:30, with his hair uncombed and his boots already on, which told her he had slept in them, which told her more about the last 6 weeks than anything Jacob had said on the drive from the station. He stopped when he saw her at the stove, and for a moment his face did the thing it had done on the platform, that raw, complicated reaching. And then he put it away somewhere and came and stood at the edge of the kitchen, the way boys stand when they want to help and do not know how to ask. "Can you build a fire without being told?" Sarah asked, not looking up from the pan. "Yes, ma'am." "The one in the main room is nearly out. Go." He went. She heard him moving with purpose, and something in her chest eased a fraction. Henry appeared 20 minutes later, drawn by the smell of coffee, and then Dorothea, and then Anna, who came into the kitchen already dressed, and with her hair pinned, and stood looking at Sarah with those Clara eyes full of wary calculation. Sarah handed her a bowl and a spoon without comment. Anna took them without comment. They worked side by side in a silence that was not comfortable yet, but was beginning to negotiate the terms of comfort, and that was enough for a first morning. By the time Jacob came in from the early barn check, all 12 children were at or near the table, and there were eggs and fresh biscuits and the last of a jar of preserves that Sarah had found at the back of the larder shelf, and Jacob stood in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands and looked at the table and said nothing. For a long enough moment that Thomas looked up from his plate. "Sit down, Mr. Turner," Sarah said. "It'll get cold." He sat down. He ate. He did not say much, but once when Samuel made a sound of pure satisfaction at something May fed him off a spoon, Jacob laughed short and surprised and gone almost before it registered, and the table went momentarily quiet at the sound of it, because it was clear from the way every Turner child went still that they had not heard that sound in a while. After breakfast, Sarah called all 12 children into the main room and assigned chores. She did it methodically by age and demonstrated ability, and she did not ask for opinions, but she did ask for objections, which was a different thing. Henry and Thomas got the east fencing. Dorothea and Anna got the kitchen. Marcus and Eli, who had apparently resolved their sizing up from the evening before in favor of alliance, got the yard. Grace and the twins got the task of keeping Samuel occupied and out of danger, which they accepted with the solemn gravity of children given an important commission. May was put in charge of the kitchen garden assessment, which Sarah told her meant walking every row and reporting exactly what was salvageable and what was not. Rose was given a small basket and told to collect eggs. "She's only 4, Jacob said low beside Sarah's ear. "She knows how to be gentle," Sarah said, "and she needs something to be responsible for." He looked at Rose, who was already moving toward the door with her basket, and the focused quiet of someone who has accepted a mission. He did not argue. The first crisis came before the morning was half over. Marcus and Eli had apparently interpreted clean the yard as determine the structural integrity of the fence posts by climbing them, and one fence post had expressed its opinion on this interpretation by giving way entirely. Eli went down with it and came up out of the dirt with a gashed palm and a torn sleeve, and the look of a boy who is calculating whether the pain is bad enough to justify showing it. Sarah heard the noise came out of the kitchen, looked at the situation, and said, "Kitchen now," to Eli before he had finished calculating. She cleaned and wrapped the cut with the efficient speed of a woman who has dealt with exactly this kind of injury on exactly this kind of boy before. Eli sat on the kitchen table and watched her work and said through his determination not to appear affected, "It don't hurt much." "I know," Sarah said. "Henry says I'm reckless." "Henry's not wrong." A pause. Then from Eli with the particular sideways curiosity of an 8-year-old boy, "Were you and our mama really sisters?" "We were." "You don't look like her. In the portrait." "No," Sarah agreed. "We looked more like our father, and she looked like our mother. It works that way sometimes in families." She tied off the bandage and met his eyes. She was the pretty one. I was the stubborn one. Eli considered this. "You seem pretty stubborn," he said, as though this was a compliment, which from an 8-year-old boy it probably was. "Go back out there," Sarah said, "and stay off the fence posts." "Yes, ma'am." He slid off the table. At the door he stopped. "Mrs. Sarah. Just Sarah." "Just Sarah." He tried it out. "Do you know how to fish?" "I do." "Pa used to take us. He hasn't since—" He stopped, started again. "He doesn't much anymore." Sarah said, "Go finish the yard, Eli." He went. She stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hands flat on the table and breathed. The second crisis came in the early afternoon and was considerably less manageable. A rider arrived at the ranch while Jacob was out at the east fence line with Henry and Thomas, and Sarah was in the kitchen garden with May cataloging what remained. She heard the horse before she saw the man, and she came around the side of the house to find a well-dressed man in his 50s dismounting at the front of the house with the deliberate ease of someone who is very accustomed to arriving places uninvited and being received anyway. He had a leather satchel. He had a pocket watch he consulted unnecessarily as she approached. He had the kind of smile that is constructed entirely out of condescension with a thin surface layer of courtesy. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, though she had not introduced herself. "I am Victor Hale. I hold the primary lending note on this property." Sarah stopped 6 feet from him and kept her hands still at her sides. "Mr. Turner is at the fence line," she said. "I can send for him." "No need," Hale said pleasantly. "In fact, it's rather more convenient to speak to you. Being as you are, it seems the organizing intelligence of this household." He smiled again. "I simply came to inform whoever is available that the note on this property is in its final extension period, 60 days remaining, after which the land reverts." Sarah said, "I was not aware Mr. Turner's note was in extension." "Were you not?" It was not a question. "What are the terms of the original note?" Something flickered in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but recalibration. He had expected a different kind of conversation than this one. "The terms are as filed with the county recorder," he said, "which I am happy to discuss with Mr. Turner at a time that is—" "What is the interest rate?" Sarah said. "And when was the extension granted, and by whose authority, and what is the precise outstanding balance as of today?" The smile became something thinner. "Mrs. Whitmore, these are matters between a lender and—" "These are matters that determine whether 7 children have a home in 60 days, Sarah said. "So I am going to ask you again, and I would prefer a straight answer. What is the outstanding balance?" Hale looked at her for a long moment. Then he named a figure. Sarah's face did not change, but her mind was moving fast behind her eyes, running numbers, running dates, running the geometry of a situation that was considerably more complicated than anyone had mentioned in any letter. "I see," she said. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Hale. I will inform Mr. Turner of your visit." "Of course." He moved to remount, then paused as though the thought had just occurred to him, though it clearly had not. "There is another option, naturally. If Mr. Turner were to consider selling a voluntary transfer quite amicable, I assure you the children would be properly—" "Good afternoon, Mr. Hale," Sarah said. He rode out. Sarah stood and watched him go, and her jaw was tight and her hands were still at her sides, and May was at her elbow saying, "Sarah, Sarah, who was that?" And she put her hand on May's shoulder and said, "Someone we are going to have to be smarter than. Come on, we've got more rows to count." She sent Thomas to fetch Jacob from the fence line. Jacob came in still dusty from the work. Henry and Thomas behind him, and Sarah was at the kitchen table with paper and pencil, and she looked up when he came in and said, "Sit down. We need to talk about Victor Hale." The color that left Jacob's face when she said that name told her everything she needed to know about how long this had been going on and how alone he had been dealing with it. "He came here," Jacob said. "He did. He spoke to me. He was expecting me not to know the right questions to ask." She paused. "He was wrong about that. Jacob." She used his name for the first time. He noticed. "How long has this been going on?" Jacob sat down heavily. "Clara didn't know the half of it. I didn't want her worrying. The original note was straightforward. I took it out 3 years ago for the East Pasture expansion. Standard terms. Then Hale bought out the original lender, and the terms started shifting. Extensions granted that I didn't ask for. Fees added. The balance kept climbing and I couldn't—" He stopped, pressed his hand flat on the table. "I didn't have anyone to help me read the language. I'm a rancher. I know cattle and I know land, but I don't know legal documents, and he knew that, and he used it," Sarah said. "Yes." "How many other ranches in this county does he hold notes on?" Jacob looked at her. 3 that I know of, maybe more. All small ranches, all men on their own." Yes. Sarah wrote something. Then she said, I am going to need to see every document he has ever given you. Every letter, every note, every extension agreement. Everything. Sarah. He said her name back to her, the way she had said his careful, like something new. This isn't your problem too. Clara asked me to come here and keep this family together, Sarah said. This ranch is how this family eats. So yes, Mr. Turner, it is absolutely my problem. She met his eyes across the table. Now go get me those documents. He got up. He brought a wooden box from the back room, the kind of box a man uses when he does not know how to organize something, but knows he should keep it. He set it on the table and took off the lid, and inside was a small disaster of papers, folded, crumpled, some water-stained, none of them in order. Sarah looked at the box. She looked at Jacob. She pulled the box toward her and said, Go check on the children. I can help. You can help by making sure Marcus hasn't gotten into anything he shouldn't, she said. I work faster alone. He looked like he wanted to argue. He did not argue. He went. She worked for 3 hours. Anna brought her coffee at some point without being asked, set it on the table, and left without a word. And Sarah thought that might have been the most important thing that happened all day. She sorted and read and made notes and cross-referenced dates and amounts, and found buried in a poorly worded extension agreement, signed the previous November, the specific clause that Hale had been counting on a transfer right provision, buried in subordinate language, that would allow him to claim the property, not after 60 days, but after 90, with a 30-day grace period that he had quietly allowed to expire while Jacob was burying his wife. It was, she thought with cold clarity, beautifully done in the worst possible way. When Jacob came back in at supper time, she had the papers sorted into 3 piles and a 4-page summary written in her clear, small handwriting, and she looked up at him and said, He's been doing this systematically. It is fraud. Not the disorganized kind, the deliberate patient kind. He found men who were isolated and short on legal knowledge, and he structured notes specifically designed to accelerate default under conditions those men were likely to face. She paused. He knew Clara was sick. Someone told him. Jacob went very still. I can't prove that yet, Sarah said. But I believe it. The timing of this extension is not coincidental. She pushed the summary across the table. What I can prove right now with the documents in front of me is that this clause is unenforceable under Kansas statute because it was added after the original note was executed without countersignature. He cannot legally claim this property on 60 days or 90 days or any other timeline until he renegotiates from scratch, and he knows it, which is why he came here talking to the woman he assumed wouldn't know that. Jacob sat down slowly. He picked up the summary and read it. He read it twice. Where did you learn to do this? He said. It was not quite a question. My husband was a county records clerk, Sarah said. For 11 years I read every document that came through our house. He taught me what to look for. She folded her hands on the table. I am going to need to go to the county records office. I want to see the original filing, and I want to see the notes on the other ranches. If the pattern is what I think it is, there is a federal land fraud complaint available to every family he has done this to. Jacob set the paper down. He looked at her across the table in the lamplight, with the box of sorted documents between them and the sound of 12 children managing themselves in the rooms beyond. And something in his face had changed from this morning in a way that was hard to name. Not softness exactly. Something harder and more honest than softness. Sarah, he said. Yes. I am glad you came. He said it plainly with the difficulty of a man who does not say that kind of thing easily, and is saying it anyway. I want you to know that, however this all works out, I am glad you came. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Tell me that again in 60 days, she said. When this is settled. He almost smiled. It was not quite a smile yet, but it was the shape one makes when a smile is coming. From the other room there was a sudden crash, followed by Marcus's voice announcing cheerfully that he was fine, followed by Eli's voice announcing that the other thing, whatever it had been, was not, followed by Dorothea's voice cutting across both of them, with the authority of a girl who has learned to manage chaos and is no longer interested in being impressed by it. Sarah stood up from the table. Jacob stood up from the table. They looked at each other. He gestured toward the doorway. "After you." She went. 3 weeks into July, and the ranch was running like a clock that had finally been wound. Not a perfect clock. Not the kind that sits in a parlor and chimes on the hour without fail. More the kind that a practical person carries in a coat pocket, a little dented, occasionally loud but reliably accurate when it mattered. Sarah had learned the difference between those two kinds a long time ago, and she had stopped wanting the parlor kind. The kitchen garden had 12 salvageable rows. May had counted correctly. Sarah and Anna had replanted 8 of them in the first week, working side by side in the early morning, before the heat made the work miserable, and Anna had stopped pretending she didn't want to talk somewhere around the 4th morning. She had started with questions about Clara, small ones, careful ones, the kind a grieving 10-year-old asks when she is testing whether an adult can be trusted with the real ones. Sarah answered every question honestly, and without softening what did not need to be softened. And after the 6th morning, Anna had stopped asking questions about Clara, and started asking questions about Sarah, which was a different kind of trust entirely. The chore system held. It held because Sarah enforced it without anger and without negotiation, and because she did every task she assigned to someone else herself first, so no child could say the work was beneath her. Henry had noticed this, and said nothing about it, which was his way of approving. Thomas had noticed, and started arriving early to his own assignments, which was his way of competing with a woman he was beginning to respect. Marcus and Eli had noticed, and decided that the best response was to see how many additional tasks they could complete before being asked, which produced more help than Sarah had anticipated, and only 2 additional accidents. Jacob noticed all of it. He said very little, but he had started leaving the coffee hot in the mornings before she came down, which was its own kind of statement. The documents were organized. The summary was ready. And on the morning of July the 14th, Sarah put on her good traveling hat and told Jacob she needed the wagon. "I'll drive you," he said. "I can manage." "I know you can manage," he said. "I am going with you." She looked at him. He looked back. She got her hat. The county records office was in Hayes, 12 miles east, and they left Thomas in charge of the household with Dorothea as his deputy, which Thomas accepted with visible pride, and Dorothea accepted with the calm of someone who had been doing the real organizational work anyway, and was simply now receiving official acknowledgement of that fact. On the road, Jacob said, "What are we looking for exactly?" "The original filings on Hale's other notes," Sarah said. "The Henderson Ranch and the Alcott property. Those are the 2 you named. If the same subordinate clause appears in both, with the same structural language, that's not an error, and it's not coincidence. That's a template. And if it's a template, then it's federal. Land fraud across multiple properties using identical fraudulent instruments is a federal matter. It goes above the county level, and it goes above Hale's relationships with whoever he's bought in this county." She paused. "He has bought someone in this county. That is why the original lender sold to him so cleanly and why no one has challenged any of this." Jacob was quiet for a mile. "Alderman Crouch," he said. "That is my suspicion. You've been suspicious of Crouch since the platform." "He told me you were watching me," Sarah said. Men who say that to women on the day they arrive are either warning them or threatening them. He was too comfortable for it to be a warning. Jacob's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "He's been on the council for 11 years. "I know, which means this may go back further than 3 other ranches." She looked at him. "Are you ready for that?" He thought about it honestly, which she had come to recognize as one of his habits. He did not answer fast when fast was not accurate. "No," he said, "but I'm ready to do it anyway." "Good enough," Sarah said. The records office was run by a clerk named Mr. Fenwick, who was approximately 100 years old and moved with the geological patience of someone who has been in the same building for so long that he has become part of its structure. He found the Henderson filing in 14 minutes and the Alcott filing in 22, and he set them on the counter in front of Sarah, with the mild curiosity of a man who does not often see a woman requesting land documentation. and is not sure what opinion he holds about it. Sarah opened the Henderson file. She found the subordinate clause in 40 seconds. She turned the file to Jacob and pointed. He read it. "It's the same," he said. "Word for word," Sarah said. "Mr. Fenwick." The old clerk looked up. "I need a certified copy of both of these filings and the Turner note and its extension. All three, today if possible." Fenwick looked at the files. He looked at Sarah. He looked at Jacob. "It's possible," he said in the tone of a man for whom everything is theoretically possible, but nothing is necessarily fast. "I will wait," Sarah said pleasantly. They waited 1 hour and 17 minutes. Jacob bought coffee from the hotel across the street and brought it back without being asked, and they sat on the bench outside the records office and drank it, and did not talk much, which was becoming a comfortable pattern between them, the kind of quiet that is not absence but presence. "My wife," Jacob said at one point without preamble. "Clara, she would have liked you." Sarah considered this. "She did like me," she said. "She just also spent 30 years being exasperated by me. She said you were impossible to discourage. She meant it as a criticism." "I don't," Jacob said. Sarah looked down at her coffee cup. She did not answer, but the quality of her silence was not the silence of someone who has not heard. Fenwick appeared in the doorway with a large envelope and the expression of a man who has done something requiring effort and would like that acknowledged. Sarah stood and took the envelope and thanked him with the specific warmth she reserved for people who had helped her when they did not have to. Fenwick looked moderately startled by it. Jacob tipped his hat. They were halfway back to the ranch when the smoke appeared on the western horizon. Sarah saw it first. She said nothing immediately because she was calculating direction distance density, the way it was moving in relation to the wind. The wind was out of the southwest and had been building since noon, and she had noticed it and filed it, and not yet followed the thought to its conclusion, and now she followed it, and her stomach dropped. "Jacob," she said. He had already seen it. He had already changed the direction of the horses. "That's the ranch," he said. She did not waste time responding. "How far?" 3 miles, maybe less." He pushed the horses. "The children." "Thomas knows what to do," she said, and she was saying it as much to herself as to him, because she did not in fact know whether Thomas knew what to do. She only knew what she had told him, and whether 14 years old and 6 weeks of grief was enough to hold 12 children through a prairie fire was not a calculation she had ever wanted to make. The smoke thickened as they drove. The wind came at them sharp and hot, carrying the smell of it, dry grass and wood and something chemical underneath. That meant the barn was already involved. Jacob drove the wagon faster than was safe, and Sarah held the seat with one hand and the envelope of documents with the other, and kept her eyes on the smoke and her mind on the children. They heard the fire before they saw the house. The sound of it was enormous and low, a continuous roar that was nothing like the sound a fire makes in a hearth. This was the sound of something consuming at scale, indifferent and total. And then they saw the yard. 12 children in the yard, all 12. Standing in a ragged group at the far edge of the property, upwind the older ones with the younger ones distributed among them. Thomas at the front, his face white and his jaw set. Henry beside him. Anna had Lily and Lottie by the hands. May had Samuel. Eli had Rose's hand, and Rose had her rabbit. And Dorothea was doing a head count, actually counting heads, pointing at each child in turn, the way Sarah had taught her. And she hit 12, and looked up and saw the wagon, and put her hand on Thomas's arm, and said something Sarah couldn't hear from this distance. Jacob pulled the wagon to a stop, and was on the ground before it fully stopped moving, and he crossed the yard in long strides, and he did not say anything. When he reached his children, he just put his hands on Thomas's shoulders, and Thomas's jaw worked, and Jacob said something low that Sarah did not hear, and Thomas nodded once fast, the same way he had nodded on the platform the day she arrived. Sarah climbed down from the wagon. She counted heads herself. 12. She crossed to May and checked Samuel, unharmed, wide-eyed, clinging to May's collar. She checked Rose. Rose was calm in the particular way she was always calm, watching the fire with the analytical gaze of someone gathering data. "Dorothea," Sarah said. "Report." Dorothea took a breath. "The barn caught first. Southwest corner. Thomas smelled it from the house at around 2 o'clock. We got all the children out inside 6 minutes. Thomas and Henry tried to move the horses, but the horses wouldn't. The horses are out. Thomas got them out." She paused. "Mrs. Henderson's cat was in the barn." "The cat?" "I got her." This was Marcus holding a barn cat against his chest with both arms, the cat in question looking outraged but unharmed. "She bit me." "Good for her," Sarah said. She looked at the barn. The east wall was gone. The roof was going. The fire had not yet reached the house. The wind was carrying it north and slightly east away from the structure, but that could change. "The house documents," she said to Jacob. "Is there anything in the house we cannot replace?" "Clara's things," he said immediately, quietly. She was already moving. "Sarah." His voice behind her sharp. "Which room?" she called back. "The bedroom. Top shelf of the wardrobe. A cedar box." He was following her. She moved faster. The house was full of smoke, but not yet burning. She went through the front door and across the main room and into the bedroom, and the cedar box was where he said it was, and she had it under her arm in 30 seconds. She came back out and shoved it into Jacob's hands and turned back toward the house. "What else?" "Sarah, the roof is fine." "What else?" "The strong box, under the bed. The deed is in there." Back in. Stronger smoke now. She got on her knees and pulled the strong box out from under the bed, and it was heavier than she had expected, and she dragged it across the floor and out the front door and down the porch steps. And Jacob met her at the bottom and took it from her hands, and his hands covered hers for a second on the metal handle, and then she was upright and moving again. "Anything else?" she said. "No." "Sarah, stop. Stop." He stepped in front of her. "Stop." She stopped. "The house is going to hold," he said. The wind shifted. "Look." She looked. He was right. The fire was moving northeast now, away from the structure, burning itself out in the dry grass of the north field, and running out of fuel before it reached the second fence line. She breathed. Around them, the children were watching in a silence that was completely different from the silence on the platform. This was the silence of people who have just survived something and have not yet sorted out how to talk about it. Thomas spoke first. He said, "The horses are in the south paddock. I got them all out. Both workhorses and Bess and the colt." "You did well," Jacob said. "Dorothea got everybody out of the house," Thomas said with the particular honesty of someone who wants credit distributed correctly. "You both did well," Sarah said. "And then from Eli, the fence post fell on Marcus's foot while we were running." Every head turned to Marcus. Marcus still had the cat. He looked at his foot. He looked up. "It doesn't hurt much," he said in the exact tone and cadence that Eli had used 3 weeks ago in the kitchen. And Sarah felt something catch in her throat that was grief, and something else entirely. "Kitchen table," she said. "Now." While she was wrapping Marcus's foot, bruised, not broken, she was fairly certain Anna came and stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed and her eyes red, and said, "Is it over?" "The fire." "Yes." "All of it." Anna's voice cracked on the second word, and she did not pretend it had not. "All of this. Hale, and the note, and people trying to take the ranch, and Papa not sleeping, and—" She stopped. "Is any of it going to be over?" Sarah looked at her across the kitchen. Marcus was very still on the table listening. Rose was on the floor in the corner with her rabbit listening. The cat had escaped Marcus's arms and was sitting on the counter looking imperious. "Yes," Sarah said. "It is going to be over, not today. But soon. I promise you that." Anna looked at her for a long moment. "You keep your promises," she said. It was not quite a question. "I do," Sarah said. "Ask your Uncle Eli. Ask your cousin May. Ask anyone who has known me longer than 3 weeks." Anna unfolded her arms. She crossed the kitchen, and she sat down on the bench next to the table, and she did not say anything else. But she also did not leave. And that was Anna's way of saying she believed her, and Sarah understood that, and accepted it, and moved on. Outside, Jacob had gotten the older boys organized into a check of the barn structure. What remained of it, what could be salvaged, what needed to come down before it became dangerous. Henry was beside him. And the particularity of that image, Jacob Turner and Henry Whitmore walking the perimeter of a ruined barn together. Henry asking questions in his careful 14-year-old way, Jacob answering them with the patience of a man who has been waiting to have someone to talk to, made Sarah stop in the doorway and look for a moment longer than she needed to. She was still holding the federal land fraud documents in their envelope under her arm. She had not put them down once during the entire fire. Victor Hale had not been near this ranch today. The fire had started in the southwest corner of the barn from what appeared to be heat and dry wood, and a season without enough water. It was not arson. She was almost certain it was not arson. But she was now less patient than she had been this morning about how much time they had. She went back inside and sat down at the kitchen table and opened the envelope and began to write. She was still writing when Jacob came in at dusk. He looked at her at the table, then at the papers, then at the lamp she had lit against the fading light. He washed his hands at the basin and dried them, and came and stood behind her and read over her shoulder for a moment. "That's the federal complaint," he said. "First draft," she said. "I need your signature and the Henderson's signature and the Alcott's if they're willing. I'd like to ride to both properties tomorrow." "They'll be willing," Jacob said. "Henderson's been fighting this for a year." "Good." She kept writing. Jacob pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. Not across the table. Beside her. Close enough that she was aware of the solidity of him, the particular exhaustion of a man who has spent a day fighting a fire and checking on 12 children and holding a household together at its seams. "You didn't put those documents down," he said. "During the fire. You ran in and out of that house twice and you never put them down." "They matter," Sarah said. "So do you," Jacob said. She stopped writing. The pen was still in her hand. She looked at the paper in front of her and did not look at him, and the lamp made a small sound between them. "Jacob," she said carefully. "I know," he said. "I know. Not yet," she breathed. "Not yet." She agreed and went back to writing, and he stayed there beside her and watched her write, and outside the Kansas night was full of the smell of smoke, and the sound of 12 children settling toward sleep, and the slow, persistent work of people building something that intends to last. The Henderson Ranch was 11 miles southwest, and they rode out at first light. Jacob drove. Sarah sat beside him with the complaint documents in the envelope on her lap, and a second set of copies folded inside her coat, because she had learned in 3 weeks of dealing with Victor Hale that you always kept a second set of copies. Thomas was in charge of the household again. He had accepted the responsibility this time, without the white-faced tension of the day before. Yesterday had done something to Thomas, had taken a boy who was trying to be a man, and shown him that he actually was one, when it counted, and that knowledge had settled into him overnight and changed the way he stood. Henry had asked to come. Sarah had said no, not because she didn't trust him, but because she needed him at the ranch, and she had said it that way, "I need you here, not you need to stay here." And Henry had heard the difference and stayed without argument, which was its own form of maturity. Robert Henderson was 63 years old and had the hands of a man who had been working land since before the war, and the eyes of someone who had stopped expecting things to go right and had therefore been surviving on stubbornness alone for the better part of a decade. He met them at his gate with a shotgun that he put away when he saw Jacob, and looked at Sarah with the particular wariness of a man who is not accustomed to being surprised. "This is Sarah Whitmore," Jacob said. "Clara's sister." Henderson looked at her. "Clara's gone," he said. It was not unkind, just direct. "She is," Sarah said. "I'm here in her place. Mr. Henderson, I have documentation showing that the subordinate transfer clause in your lending note with Victor Hale is legally unenforceable under Kansas statute. I also have evidence that identical language appears in at least 2 other notes he holds in this county, which makes this a pattern rather than an error and elevates it to federal fraud. I need your signature on a joint complaint. I need it today." Henderson stared at her. He looked at Jacob. Jacob said nothing, just waited. "Come inside," Henderson said. His wife Ruth met them at the door, small, sharp-eyed, with the look of a woman who has been waiting for someone to say exactly those words for a very long time. She put coffee on before they were seated. Sarah spread the documents on the kitchen table and walked Henderson through each one with the systematic patience of someone who has explained a complex thing before and knows that patience is not condescension, it is respect. Henderson read slowly. He asked 2 questions. Sarah answered both. Ruth asked a 3rd question from the stove, not turning around, and it was the sharpest question of the 3, and Sarah answered it with the directness it deserved. Henderson picked up the pen. He signed. Ruth crossed to the table, dried her hands on her apron, and signed as a witness without being asked. She looked at Sarah over the documents and said, "How long have you been in Harland Creek?" 3.5 weeks, Sarah said. Ruth looked at Jacob. Jacob looked at the table. Ruth made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was its near relation. "Lord," she said, and went back to the stove. The Alcott property was 4 miles further, and the reception there was more complicated. James Alcott was 38, and frightened in the way that men who are not accustomed to being frightened become frightened loudly and sideways, expressing itself as anger at the nearest available target. He met them in his yard, and when Sarah began to explain what she had found, he cut her off inside of 40 seconds. "I know what's in that note," he said. "I've known for 6 months, and I've been to the county office, and I've been to the bank, and I've been to Crouch, and every door I knock on closes in my face. What makes you think a piece of paper and a woman I've never met is going to change any of that?" "Because this piece of paper goes to the federal land office in Topeka," Sarah said, "not to the county office, and not to Alderman Crouch. It bypasses every door that has been closed to you." Alcott looked at her. "Crouch will find out." "Yes, after it's filed, and after it's out of his jurisdiction." "And before it's filed." "We file it day after tomorrow," Sarah said, "which gives him no time to interfere if we move correctly." Alcott's jaw was tight. "And if this doesn't work? If Hale has people in Topeka too? Then what? I lose this land, and I've also made an enemy of a man with reach and resources, and James." Jacob's voice quiet and flat. Alcott stopped. "I know what it costs to be afraid of him," Jacob said. "I've been afraid of him for 2 years. I know what that does to a man. It does the same thing it's been doing to you." He paused. Sarah found the way out. "All we have to do is walk through it." Alcott looked at Jacob for a long time. He looked at Sarah. He looked at the document. "If this goes wrong," he said. "It won't," Sarah said. "How do you know?" "Because I am very good at this," Sarah said, "and I have 12 children at home who need it to work, and I do not fail things that matter." Alcott picked up the pen. He held it for 3 seconds that felt considerably longer. Then he signed. They were back on the road to Harland Creek by 2 in the afternoon. Jacob drove, and Sarah sat beside him, and the envelope was heavier now, with 3 signatures and the weight of 3 families' futures, and she held it against her chest with both arms, the way she had held the strongbox out of the burning house, like something she was not going to let go of, regardless of what happened. They were 2 miles from town when they saw Crouch's buggy coming the other direction. He pulled it to a stop in the middle of the road. There was no choice but to stop. Jacob pulled the horses up and waited, and Crouch climbed down from his buggy with the deliberate slowness of a man who has decided that he controls the pace of this conversation. "Mr. Turner," he said. Then he looked at Sarah. "Mrs. Whitmore, you've been busy." "We've been to see the Hendersons," Jacob said. "And the Alcotts, I imagine." He smiled. "News travels." Sarah said nothing. She was calculating. Someone at the records office. Fenwick himself, or someone who worked for him. Hale had eyes in more places than she had accounted for, and she had underestimated the speed of his network, and she filed that away and kept her face still. I want to be helpful, Crouch said, in the tone of a man who has never in his life been helpful and knows it. I want to suggest that there are ways to resolve Mr. Turner's situation that do not require all of this. He gestured vaguely at the envelope. Mr. Hale has indicated a willingness to extend significant generosity in a voluntary sale. The children would be provided for. Mr. Turner could— No, Jacob said. Jacob. No, Jacob said again. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. Crouch looked at Sarah. Perhaps Mrs. Whitmore can be made to see the practical. Mrs. Whitmore sees the practical situation very clearly, Sarah said. The practical situation is that the clause in question is unenforceable. The pattern of identical fraudulent language across 3 properties constitutes federal fraud, and the complaint documenting all of this will be on a train to Topeka the day after tomorrow. The practical situation is that obstructing a federal complaint is a federal offense, and that any individual who has materially assisted in the construction of fraudulent lending instruments is equally liable. She held his gaze. I believe that covers the practical situation, Mr. Crouch. Crouch was very still. The pleasant expression had not left his face, but something behind it had gone cold and flat. You are very certain of yourself, he said. I am very certain of the law, Sarah said, which is different and more durable. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he climbed back into his buggy and turned it around and drove back toward town. Jacob waited until he was out of sight, then exhaled slowly. He's going to Hale. Of course he is, Sarah said. Drive faster. Jacob drove faster. The rest of that afternoon was a controlled sprint. Sarah went directly to the kitchen table and spent 2 hours making 3 complete copies of the full complaint packet. Every document, every certified copy, every signed page. While Jacob sent Thomas to the Henderson place with a message asking Robert to come to the ranch at first light tomorrow with anyone else he trusted. Dorothea organized supper without being asked, and managed all 10 younger children through the meal with the efficiency of a girl who has fully accepted her role as second in command and is no longer ambivalent about it. Anna came to the table at 7 that evening and sat across from Sarah and said, "Can I help?" Sarah looked up. "Can you write a fair hand?" "Yes." "Copy this page exactly." She pushed a sheet across. Every word same order, nothing added, nothing left out. Anna took it. She copied it in a hand that was better than fair. It was precise and even and fast. Sarah watched from the corner of her eye and said nothing until Anna slid the completed page back, and then she said, "That's excellent. Do the next one." They worked together for an hour. Anna did not ask questions. She did not need to. She was Clara's daughter, and she had Clara's precision and the particular focus of a child who understands that what she is doing matters, and that understanding made her steady in a way that 10 years old does not usually produce. At one point, Anna said without looking up from the page, "Hale came to the house once, before you came, when Papa was in the fields. He talked to me." Sarah's pen stopped. "What did he say?" "He said Papa was going to lose the ranch. He said it like he was sorry about it." Her voice was perfectly controlled. "He said if we were lucky someone would take us in. Me and Thomas and the others. He said it like we were strays." She looked up. "I didn't tell Papa. I didn't want him to worry more." Sarah put down her pen. She looked at Anna across the table and felt something move through her that was not quite rage, but was its composed, purposeful cousin. "He said that to a child?" she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Anna." Sarah waited until the girl met her eyes fully. "He is not going to touch this ranch. He is not going to touch any of you. What he said to you was a lie told to a 10-year-old to frighten her into helplessness, and the man who does that is a coward, and I am not afraid of cowards." She paused. "Are you?" Anna considered it honestly. "I was," she said, "before you came. And now," Anna looked down at the page she was copying. "Now I'm just angry," she said. "Good," Sarah said. "Angry is useful. Frightened is not. Keep writing." Anna kept writing. The twist came at 9 o'clock that night, and it came in the form of a letter delivered by a boy Sarah didn't recognize, handed to Jacob at the front door, and Jacob read it standing in the doorway, and the color left his face the same way it had left when she first said Victor Hale's name. He brought it to the kitchen table and set it in front of her without a word. She read it. Hale had filed a counter-complaint with the county court, not federal county, which was his territory. The complaint alleged that Sarah Whitmore was operating without legal standing in the Turner household, that she was not a legal guardian, not a spouse, not a relative of record, and that her access to and management of Turner property documents was unauthorized. He was requesting a county court order to have all documents in her possession seized pending review. He had also, and this was the part that made her read the sentence twice, filed an emergency petition questioning Jacob's competence as a guardian on grounds of grief-related incapacity, and was requesting temporary county oversight of the Turner children's welfare. Sarah read the letter twice. The second time, she was very calm. Jacob was not calm. He was standing behind her, and she could hear the quality of his breathing, and she knew what was happening inside him. The fear, the rage, the 6 weeks of grief and isolation converging into something that was very close to the edge of what a person can hold without breaking. "He is threatening my children," Jacob said. "He is using your children as leverage," Sarah said. "There is a difference. He does not want your children. He wants the land, and he is using every tool he has to make you panic and sign the voluntary sale before the complaint reaches Topeka. Then we file tomorrow, not the day after. The train to Topeka leaves at 7 in the morning," Sarah said. "Henderson needs to be here by 5. We need Alcott's signed statement in hand before 6. She was already writing. "Jacob, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The county court order will not be issued before morning. Crouch cannot convene a county session tonight without cause, and a complaint filed at 9 o'clock on a weekday evening does not constitute emergency cause under Kansas civil procedure. We have until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, and that is enough time." "You're sure?" She looked up at him. "I am sure." He breathed. Once, twice. The edge in him pulled back from the precipice and settled into something harder and more useful. "Tell me what you need," he said. "Henderson here by 5. Alcott's signed statement. Thomas can ride tonight. Henderson can bring it with him if Alcott will send it by messenger. Coffee on the stove by 4. And—" She paused. "Sit down, Jacob. You cannot do any of this if you fall apart, and you are close to falling apart." "I'm not." "You are. It's allowed. She was your wife, and she was Clara, and this is everything she loved, and you are allowed to be close to the edge." Her voice was level and direct, and not without gentleness. "But not tonight. Tonight I need you functional." He sat down. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them, and breathed with the careful deliberateness of a man bringing himself back from somewhere. Thomas appeared in the doorway. He had been awake, of course he had been awake, and Sarah looked at him and said, "Can you ride to the Alcott place tonight?" "Yes, ma'am." "Tell him we file tomorrow morning. Tell him we need his signed statement back here by 4:30. Tell him this is the moment, and it does not come again." Thomas looked at his father. Jacob gave a single nod. Thomas went. The house was very quiet after that. The younger children were asleep. Dorothea and Henry were awake upstairs. She could tell by the quality of the silence, the listening kind. Anna had fallen asleep at the kitchen table over the last copy page, and Sarah had put a blanket around her shoulders and left her there, because moving her would wake her and she needed sleep more than a bed tonight, Sarah wrote. Jacob sat across from her, and eventually stopped pretending to read and just sat, which was what he needed, and they both knew it. At some point close to midnight he said, "What if it doesn't work?" Sarah did not look up from writing. "It will work. But if it—" "Jacob." She looked up then. "I have been asked that question by James Alcott and by you, and I will tell you what I told him. I am very good at this, and I have 12 children who need it to work, but I will tell you something I did not tell him." She held his gaze. "I also have a promise to keep. To your wife. To my sister." She asked me to come here and keep this family together, and I am going to keep this family together if I have to walk those documents to Topeka myself on foot in the dark." The lamp was burning low. Anna was asleep with her cheek on the table. The copies were stacked and ordered and ready. Jacob looked at Sarah across the table, and the lamplight was between them, and he said very quietly, "She knew what she was doing when she wrote that letter." Sarah's throat tightened. "She usually did," she said. "She knew you were the one." Sarah looked back down at the documents. "Get some sleep," she said. 4 o'clock comes early. He stood. At the kitchen doorway he stopped. Without turning, he said, "She would have been glad to know you, that you were here, that you came." Sarah kept her eyes on the paper. Her hand was steady. "Go to sleep, Jacob," she said softly. He went. And she stayed at the table and finished the last page and stacked it with the others and sat for a moment in the quiet house, with all of it in front of her 12 sleeping children, and one good man, and a promise made to a dead woman who had trusted her with everything she loved. And the lamp burned down to almost nothing, and the Kansas night pressed in close, and Sarah Whitmore did not move until the work was done. Thomas came back at 3:47 in the morning. Sarah heard the horse before the door opened, and she was already standing when he came in dusty and wide-eyed, with an envelope in his hand and the look of a boy who has ridden hard in the dark and is quietly proud of it in a way he is trying not to show. "Alcott signed," Thomas said. "His wife made me eat something first. She said you'd want me to eat something." Sarah took the envelope and opened it, and checked the signature and the date, and every line of the statement, and it was correct, all of it, exactly what she needed. She pressed it flat against the table, and added it to the stack and said, "Sit down. There's bread on the shelf." Thomas sat. He ate. He watched her organize the final packet with the focused attention of someone filing away how a thing is done for future use, and Sarah was aware of this and did not discourage it. Jacob was up at 4, as she had asked. He came into the kitchen and looked at the stacked documents and at Thomas eating bread and at Sarah still in the same chair she'd been in when he left at midnight, and he said, "Did you sleep?" "The documents are ready," she said. "That's not what I asked." "The documents are ready, Jacob." He let it go. He started the coffee. Henderson arrived at 4:55 with Ruth beside him on the wagon bench, because Ruth Henderson had apparently decided that this was not a morning she was going to wait at home for news, and Sarah thought that was exactly right. Robert Henderson shook Jacob's hand and looked at the document stack and said, "What do you need from me?" "I need you to ride with us to the station," Sarah said. "I need you standing on that platform when I put this on the train. If Crouch tries to stop us, he stops 3 families, not 1. Henderson nodded once. "Done." Henry appeared from upstairs fully dressed and looked at the assembled adults and said, "I'm coming." Sarah looked at him. He looked back with the steady level gaze of a 14-year-old who has calculated the situation and decided his position and is not going to be talked out of it by anything short of a direct order from someone he respects. "Stay left of Jacob," she said. "Don't speak unless spoken to. If anything happens, your first job is Thomas and the younger ones." "Yes, ma'am," Henry said, and the ma'am was new, and they both knew it. They left for town at 5:15. 2 wagons. 6 adults and 1 14-year-old who was conducting himself as an adult, which Sarah counted. The Kansas sky was still dark at the edges, with a line of pale gray opening up in the east, and the road was cool, and the horses moved at a pace that was not quite urgent, but was deliberately faster than ordinary. Sarah held the documents on her lap. She had wrapped them in oilcloth, and tied the oilcloth with cord, and held the package against her chest with both arms, and she did not loosen her grip for the entire 12 miles. Jacob drove. He did not speak much. Once about halfway he said, "If Hale is at the station." "He won't be," Sarah said. "It's 5 in the morning. Men like Hale don't do their own early rising. They send people." "And if he sends Crouch?" "Crouch has no legal authority to detain a federal document filing," Sarah said. "He knows that. What he has is the ability to make a scene and hope we flinch. We are not going to flinch." Jacob was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "We're not." Harlan Creek was barely awake when they came down the main street. A few lights in the hotel windows. The livery already open because liveries open with the dark. The station at the far end of the street quiet and pale in the early gray. And on the platform waiting Alderman Crouch. He had 2 men with him that Sarah did not recognize, not deputies, no badges, just men built for standing and looking significant. He watched the 2 wagons come to a stop with the expression of someone who arrived expecting to hold a position and is recalculating its defensibility. Sarah climbed down from the wagon before it fully stopped. She had the document package under her arm. Jacob was down beside her immediately, and Henderson was down from his wagon, and Ruth Henderson stayed on the bench and watched with the particular alertness of a woman who is the last line of information in a chain of people who need to know what happens here. Crouch stepped to the edge of the platform. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I'm afraid I have a county court order." "Let me see it," Sarah said. He held out a paper. She took it and read it in the gray morning light with the focused speed of someone who has been reading legal documents for 11 years and knows exactly where the authority and the limits are. She read it twice. Then she folded it and held it in her left hand and looked up at Crouch. "This order directs the return of Turner property documents to county oversight pending review," she said. "It does not identify the specific documents by instrument number. It does not have a valid court seal that is a clerk's stamp, not a judicial seal. And it was signed at 11:43 last night by a justice of the peace who does not have jurisdiction over federal filing instruments." She paused. "This paper is not enforceable against a federal complaint filing, and the federal complaint is what I am filing today." Crouch's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Whitmore, I would advise you to step aside," Sarah said, "because that train arrives in 11 minutes, and I am going to be on this platform when it does, and I am going to hand these documents to the mail clerk, and they are going to Topeka, and there is nothing in that paper you are holding that changes any of that." One of the men behind Crouch took a step forward. Jacob moved. He did not say anything. He simply moved so that he was standing between that man and Sarah, and Henderson moved to his right, and Henry, who had been told to stay left of Jacob and had interpreted that instruction with considerable flexibility, stepped up on Jacob's left, and the 3 of them stood there in the gray morning with the absolute stillness of people who have decided something and are not going to be undecided. The man stopped. Crouch looked at the line of them. He looked at Sarah behind them with the oilcloth package under her arm. He looked at Ruth Henderson on the wagon bench, watching him with the patient and deeply unimpressed gaze of a woman who has been watching men like him her entire life. He stepped back. Sarah walked onto the platform. The train was 8 minutes late, which were the longest 8 minutes of her recent life. But she stood, and she did not pace, and she did not check the documents again, because she had checked them enough, and checking them again would not make the train come faster. Jacob stood beside her. Crouch and his men stayed at the edge of the platform and said nothing, and did nothing, because there was nothing they could do, and they all knew it. The train came. The mail clerk was a young man with a red mustache and the practiced efficiency of someone who does this 12 times a day. Sarah handed him the package and gave him the Topeka address and paid the fee and got the receipt, and she held that receipt in her hand and turned around, and the train pulled away behind her, and it was done. Jacob let out a breath she suspected he had been holding since 5 in the morning. Henderson laughed short, startled the laugh of a man who has been afraid for a long time and has just had the fear removed faster than he expected. He reached across and shook Jacob's hand, and then, with the slightly formal courtesy of a man not accustomed to the gesture, turned and shook Sarah's as well. Crouch was already walking back toward his buggy. He did not look back. His 2 men followed him, and the 3 of them drove away up the main street, and Sarah watched them go and said very quietly to no one in particular, "Good morning." Henry made a sound that was almost a laugh. The response from Topeka came in 19 days. Sarah had expected 3 weeks and received it in less, which told her that the pattern in those documents was as clear to federal eyes as it had been to hers. The letter was addressed to Jacob Turner and Robert Henderson and James Alcott jointly, and it confirmed the opening of a federal fraud investigation into the lending practices of Victor Hale across 4 Kansas counties, 4, not 3, which meant there were properties she had not found, and families she had not known about. And Hale's operation was considerably larger than even her most pessimistic calculation. It also confirmed that the transfer clause in all 3 notes was unenforceable as filed. The Turner Ranch, the Henderson property, and the Alcott land were not subject to seizure under any timeline Hale had proposed. Jacob read the letter at the kitchen table with 12 children in various stages of breakfast around him, and when he got to the second paragraph, he put it down and pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the ceiling, and Sarah watched him do it and said nothing, because some moments do not need words, and this was one of them. Anna read the letter next. She read it standing up very straight the way she stood when she was holding herself together for the benefit of the younger ones. When she finished, she set it down carefully and looked at Sarah and said, "You did it." "We did it," Sarah said. "You copied half those documents." Anna's chin came up slightly. "I did," she said. And that was Clara, that exact gesture, so precisely Clara, that Sarah had to look away for a moment at something that was not Anna's face. Alcott came 2 days later to return the copy of the complaint Sarah had given him. He came alone, left his horse at the fence, knocked at the front door, and when Sarah opened it, he stood on the porch with his hat in his hands and said, "I want to apologize for what I said, about whether you could do it." "You were frightened," Sarah said. "Frightened people ask hard questions. I don't hold it against you." He looked at her for a moment. "Clara Turner was lucky to have you for a sister," he said. "The other way around," Sarah said. "The summer harvest celebration was Ruth Henderson's idea. She came to the ranch on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after the Topeka letter and informed Sarah and Jacob that the Henderson place had more food than 2 people could reasonably process before it went bad, and that they were having a gathering, and it was not a question. She said this with the calm authority of a woman who has decided something and is not inviting negotiation. The afternoon was warm, and the Henderson yard was full of people, not just the 3 families who had signed the complaint, but neighbors from across the area. People who had heard what had happened and what it meant for their own land security and wanted to be in the same place as the people who had done it. Sarah had not expected this. She had expected a quiet family afternoon. What she got was 30 people and 4 different kinds of pie, and someone had brought fiddles, and the children, all 12 of them, ran in a loose, complicated pack that bore no resemblance to the careful, separate groups that had stood on the train platform 2 months ago. She was standing at the edge of it all, watching Eli and Marcus chase something across the yard with the joint intensity of a coalition that had long since stopped distinguishing between Turner and Whitmore when Jacob came and stood beside her. "Thomas asked Henry to teach him to play cards," he said. "I hope Henry let him win." "Henry never lets anyone win at anything." "Thomas will be fine," Sarah said. "He can take it." They stood there for a moment in the warm afternoon watching the yard. Samuel was on a blanket in the grass being guarded by Grace and Lily and Lottie with the seriousness of children assigned a sacred trust. Rose was sitting near them, not playing with them exactly, but within their orbit, which was as close as Rose generally came to joining anything, and was Sarah had learned Rose's version of belonging. "Sarah." Jacob's voice had a different quality than it usually did. Careful, prepared. She turned to look at him. His hat was in his hands. She looked at his hands, then at his face. "I want to say something to you," he said. "I want to say it here in front of these people because I am done saying important things only when nobody is listening." He paused. Around them the afternoon continued. Children running, neighbors talking fiddles, beginning their tuning somewhere behind the house, and Jacob stood in the middle of all of it with his hat in his hands and looked at her. "You came here because Clara asked you to. You came for 7 children you had never met. You brought 5 of your own. You walked into a house that was falling apart, and a ranch under threat, and a man who was barely holding himself together, and you did not flinch from any of it. Not one single day." His voice was steady, but she could hear what was underneath it, the whole weight of 2 months and one lost wife and 12 children and a fire and a federal fraud case and every lamp burned low at every kitchen table. I don't want you to leave. I don't want the children to lose you. I don't want—" He stopped, started again. "I am asking you to stay. Permanently. As my wife. As their mother." His jaw tightened and released. "I know it's not. I know this is not the way a man is supposed to ask. I know you deserve something better than a Kansas yard with 30 people watching. But I am done waiting for the right moment because I think the right moment is the moment you decide it is, and I am deciding." The yard had gone quiet. Not completely, the children were still moving. Samuel was still on his blanket, but the adults nearby had gone still with the particular attentiveness of people who understand that something real is happening and do not want to interrupt it. Sarah looked at Jacob. She looked at the hat in his hands. She looked at the yard full of people and children and the specific improbable family she had assembled over 2 months in a Kansas summer. And she thought about Clara writing a letter from a deathbed with her clear, steady hand. And she thought about a train platform and an alderman who said she was unsuitable, and she thought about a box of disordered documents and a fire and a federal complaint and a receipt she still kept folded in her coat pocket because it was the piece of paper that had done what it needed to do. She thought about Thomas nodding fast with his chin down, Anna uncrossing her arms, Eli asking if she knew how to fish, Rose on the kitchen floor with her rabbit watching everything with those quiet, assessing eyes. She thought about a man who left the coffee hot in the mornings and sat beside her instead of across from her, and said not yet with the patience of someone who understood that the right thing said too soon is the wrong thing. "Yes," she said. Jacob looked at her for 1 second. That was not quite believing, and then it was believing, and his shoulders dropped with the release of something he had been carrying a long time. Thomas let out a sound from somewhere behind her that was pure relief, unguarded, and Anna said, "Finally," in a tone so dry and so precisely Clara that half the adults in the yard laughed and did not know why. Henry said nothing. But when Sarah turned, she saw him standing with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the particular way he said it when he was not going to let anyone see him be moved, and his eyes were bright, and she thought that was enough. May was already crying. She made no effort to stop. Eli turned to Marcus and said in a carrying whisper, "I knew. I knew the whole time." "You did not," Marcus whispered back. "I absolutely did." Ruth Henderson put both hands over her mouth and looked at her husband. And Robert Henderson put his arm around her and shook his head in the way of a man who is very glad he came to this particular afternoon gathering. Jacob put his hat back on his head. He looked at Sarah. She looked back at him. Around them, 30 people and 12 children, and the accumulated weight of 2 months of work and grief and stubbornness and patience. And something that had been growing in the space between a kitchen table and a lamp burning low, all of it present, all of it real, all of it earned. "I'll get you a proper ring," he said. "I don't need a proper ring," she said. "I know you don't need one," he said. "That's not why I'm getting it." Someone behind them started the fiddles in earnest, and the afternoon came back to itself louder now, warmer with the particular quality of celebration that comes not from things going right by luck, but from people making them right by choosing to over and over again in the small hours and the hard days and all the ordinary moments that add up to a life. That evening, when the gathering was done, and the children were in bed, and the house was quiet, Sarah sat at the kitchen table one last time with a cup of coffee and the receipt from the Topeka, mailing still folded in her coat pocket, and the cedar box on the shelf that held Clara's things, and the list she had made on her very first night in this house, now worn soft at the folds from being opened and checked, and added to over 2 months. Every item had a line through it. She folded the list and set it on the table. She looked at the kitchen, the clean basin, the swept floor, the boots lined up at the door in order of size from Jacob's down to Samuel's, the cat asleep on the bench, the lamp burning steady. She thought about what it means to keep a promise. Not the easy kind, the kind you make when everything is possible and loss is still theoretical. The real kind. The kind you make when someone you love is dying and they look at you and trust you with everything they cannot carry anymore, and you take it, and you carry it, and you do not put it down. Clara had known. That was the thing Sarah had come to understand over 2 months and 12 children, and one good man, and a Kansas summer that had tried every way it knew to break her. Clara had known exactly what she was doing when she wrote that letter. She had not written it out of desperation. She had written it out of the most precise and specific faith. Faith in her sister. Faith in what her sister was capable of. Faith that love, when it is built on something real, builds something real back. A family is not something you find. It is not something you are handed. It is something you build with your hands and your presence, and your refusal to leave when leaving would be easier. And you build it one morning and one hard day, and one lamp burned low at a time, until one day you look up and it is there, solid and warm and entirely yours. Sarah picked up her coffee cup. She looked at the list one last time. Then she folded it one final time, and placed it inside the cedar box alongside Clara's things where it belonged. Some promises, when you keep them, become something larger than the promise itself. They become the foundation of everything built after. And what Sarah Whitmore built in Harland Creek, Kansas, in the summer of 1883, out of grief and grit, and the stubborn, enduring power of a woman who did not flinch, stood for the rest of her life and the lives of 12 children who grew up knowing that family is not a thing you are born into by luck, but a thing you choose every single day on purpose. And that is the kind that lasts.